Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 529 of Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Easy, and I'm joined by a man who, back in his day, they had Pioneer RCQs, Mason Clark.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, I'm good. We'll talk a little bit about the death of Pioneer, as Twitter's calling it, a little bit later in the show, but we're going to dive right into our main topic today, which is standard before foundations. And I'm really excited for this topic, Mason. Everybody knows I'm a huge standard lover. I play a lot of arena. I've woken up at the early hours of dawn to play standard challenges. It's just like my favorite format. And we have quite a doozy of a standard format. Thanks honestly to the last set. In a lot of ways, things really changed. Kind of just want to have a conversation with you about this today. Where do you think the format sits today?
I think it sits in a really weird spot. So we're at this lull between times where standard matters with a potentially incredibly impactful set coming out in 1 month from the time of doing this recording with Foundations. Just the cards we know, specifically Llanowar Elf, is such a game-changing card. And there's really a lot of eyes on, okay, is Foundations a set with lots of things like Llanowar Elves? Or is it a set where Llanowar Elves is the power outlier, right? For example, if Llanowar Elves is setting the tone for the type of cards we could expect, something like Mana Leak or Rampant Growth and those kind of cards, and even something maybe even like Lightning Bolt, depending on how spicy they want to be, could be in there. I'm personally not in that camp, and I think it's sort of a set that's going to lay a lot of groundwork things, but this is one of the cooler things they thought they could do. But it's at a really weird time. And then we're squeezing that in with Duskmourn, I think really showing kind of maybe what I mentioned at the bit of the last set review of this is a really, really strong set. The cards in it are really, really impactful. And it's creating kind of a huge shakeup where, Duskmourn to me feels like the most powerful set in standard. And we're still experimenting and learning with it. And we're in that early discovery phase, and also that time where there's not a lot of eyes on the format that are public, because there's not a lot of reason for the average player to be playing it. So we're seeing a lot of decks succeed and a lot of very interesting strategies pop up, all while World is just 2 weeks away from the time of this recording, and really is an interesting point of maybe we should have even done this then and looked at it, because we'd only then be 2 weeks though away from Foundation. So the format's in this very interesting spot.
Yeah, I agree. I just, when we were planning out episodes, we really wanted to talk about kind of the state of standard, a little bit before Foundations, before Worlds, to and maybe after Worlds is a great time to revisit and something that we should think about. But I'm really glad to be doing the episode at this time because of all the things that you mentioned. And honestly, I think that it's so interesting. I like a lot of different types of formats in Magic. I'm a really big fan of I really like a rock, paper, scissors format. I really like a 5-pronged format, where there's kind of this star going on kind of thing happening. This format specifically is very interesting, especially when you look at challenge results and look at kind of win percentages of decks of data that we have, because I think that the format has two very consistent archetypes, and then everything else is still doing well around that. And we'll get into that, but that's my take on it, is that we have two very consistent archetypes in I would say the red aggro decks. I think red-green obviously being the one that is the most consistent. I know that, some people have tried Black Splash for Sellsword and things like that, but it continues to be that the green ones seem to outperform. And then I would say mono-white or Caretaker's Talent decks are the other, very consistent, you can always expect them to do well type of deck. But I don't think that anybody has figured out which version of even these two decks, these two archetypes, is correct at this point. Like it is, and then there's a bunch of other decks. So
Yeah, it's a very weird spot. We're seeing Dimir mid-range kind of since the release of kind of like Gix and the return to standard. It's been doing good. We're now seeing that the Enduring Curiosity is kind of replacing Gix in a lot of lists, but not all of them. And so that's kind of like the third one, along with Domain, sort of still just hanging out, doing what Domain does, kind of being this big rampy deck, despite having, I'd argue, a pretty tough matchup against that red deck you described and this Dimir deck on average. So
now that you're saying this, though, I think that there's a third pillar that I probably should mention, which is just black mid range decks in general. Of like, it started with Golgari. I think Dimir then came in. Orzhov has been. If you're playing Arena, you play against Orzhov mid range a ton.
Well, that's so interesting. I've been playing a ton as I've been going to the gym every day, and some of the days I just only do the treadmill for like an hour, and I've been playing Blue Black Control. Yeah, and I was joking with a friend that I'm playing the slowest, grindiest Blue Black deck you've ever seen at 4 miles per hour. On the treadmill.
Are you doing walking? That's so dope.
Yeah, just like I'm trying to walk at least an hour, and some other days doing other things at the gym. Yeah. But
do you bring an iPad, or do you bring or do you just do it on your phone?
I don't have an iPad; I just do it on the phone.
Oh, cool.
And so I just play Blue Black Control, and I put against like all of these decks. Obviously, for I just told you, I don't play a ton of games because my deck takes forever to win unless my opponents concede. Winning is an afterthought when it comes to my deck. But it is interesting because that's actually one of the few archetypes I haven't seen. So what is Orzhov mid-range? Is it just like the Beza, like good cards? What am I expecting to run into that? Because that's actually a deck I'm not very familiar with.
It's just Bats mid-range. Like it's,
Oh, the Bats deck. Okay. Sorry. I thought you meant I got you now.
Yeah. I mean it is. Maybe I should have called it Bats because I just read off of Goldfish, like, but I do think that it kind of sits in a similar spot of the other mid range decks for what it's worth. It's like slightly more. I mean, it depends on which version of the other thing about this format. I guess I should say is that there is a lot of difference in speed that any of the decks can have. Like the Golgari deck can be super slow and grindy and rampy, or it can be aggressively slanted and have a combo finish, and like the Dimir deck can be like really low to the ground with like things that draw you a bunch of cards and then like tempo you out. And I mean, even the Gruul deck has a version that doesn't play Slick Shot because it's faster to not play Slick Shot. So I don't know, there's just like a lot there. I want to talk about Foundations really quick though, if we can, because I have been saying they should do something like this for as long as you've known me. Are you excited for the idea of Foundations?
No, I'm pretty hesitant. I think with time they'll iterate it well, but a forever set, if you aim high, has some real potential issues. I am just believing in my heart of hearts that they're like Llanowar Elf is like the best card in the set when it comes to a power outlier standpoint. And the rest of the things are lower floor and allow for kind of the base standard sets to shine. But honestly, one of the things I like about standard is that it does change so much, and there is so much difference in the like games, despite kind of always having similar tools, right? Like one thing I think is really cool is like we might have this active treason for a couple of years that deck they're playing, but then we get this different one, and this different one might play completely differently. In like a real way. Same with like removal spells. I think it's probably the example that players are most overtly aware of. And so that's pretty interesting, all while kind of having a similar feel. So if Foundations is like full of negates and duress and things like that, and save reprint equity in the sets, or the set leads to do cooler things, then I'm pretty excited. If it's like Llanowar Elf, Rampant Growth, Mana Leak, I'm like pretty uninterested in playing standard. That's kind of like where I'm at personally, but that's like also a personal taste thing. I like how standard can release a set and it changes everything.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I mean, you've heard me talk about this. I don't think I've ever mentioned. I think you've actually mentioned me mentioning this on the podcast. and I might have never mentioned it, but I was like a pretty big proponent of like, I think it was like Rampant Growth, Doomblade, Mana Leak, O-Ring.
You've mentioned this in the show, though.
Have
Yeah,
I?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
Burst Lightning, I think, was the fifth one of like
Mhm.
cards that I just wish were forever standard cards.
I just wish Lava Spike was not Burst, personally, but that's a me thing.
That could be fine. Like, I think
Yeah.
Lava Spike is like a fine design space to.
Oh, Lava Spike's arcane, though, so I guess you need a new one.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's fair.
New Lava Spike. Give the burn players some tools. They need it.
Can you imagine?
you know?
Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, it could happen.
Yeah, that's very easy.
My hope for this is that it does what its name says, right? Like,
Mhm.
I literally thought to myself today when thinking about this episode between meetings today at work, I was like, how many boxes of this should I buy? Like, if it's going to be around for did they say 5 years?
Yeah, so ideally Foundations will be around for forever if you haven't heard of it before. But in 5 years, they're going to double check the card pool. And it sounds like every, 5-ish years, they're going to kind of double check and make sure, like, hey, this card isn't causing us huge issues. So
Yeah, so for me, like, that's something that with Maxwell wanting to learn Magic now, and standard, I literally bought multiple standard decks. I'm going to teach him to play with standard decks because I just think it's much easier than the other formats to pick up the game in a lot of ways. Like we'll practice with. So he also has some core set like mini decks that we'll learn with and stuff. But I think this is just the type of thing that standard needs to succeed. Like, and I think that Magic is better when standard succeeds, and thus I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, I hope it helps standard. I just hope it isn't like, okay, we always play with these foundation cards, and what 10 cards do we add from the new sets? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I hope it is like a supplementing or doing like the duress negate role of like basically saying, hey, set leads, don't worry about putting negate or duress in your format. It's covered. We have it here forever. We have Pithing Needle here forever. There's never going to be an issue with like, Marvel, for example, where it's like, oh, if we had a couple of cards for this, we actually maybe would be fine. Like the data isn't very good on it. So
it's funny though, because like I know a lot of people, Llanowar Elves is one of the cards that they're excited for. I think there's Honor Effect in green white that some people are really excited for. I think Day of Judgment is another one that I know people. When I sent the cards to some of my friends, like Day of Judgment was the card that they were most like. Finally, we just get like a normal one. I think that if we think about decks that are not performing well, that are slightly like you think, okay, like this could be a thing. Should we just talk about Llanowar Elves for a second and like the impact it could have on the standard format?
We can. I think one of the things that Llanowar Elf really does is it encourages you to play impactful 3-drops, right? Like, and sort of skip the 2 and curve out and get like a tempo lead. And one of the recent design philosophies has been, 3-drops is sort of where you start getting the real juice. And one of the cards I've been using as a good example of this is Galissa Sunslayer, right? That one's going to require you to be a multicolored deck. That might be a little bit more challenging, right? But, like you get that card out on turn 2, that's a huge difference. Very similarly, I think, a much easier one to imagine is Overlord of the Hauntwoods, where if you're playing this big mana style deck, this is a thing you kind of want as a threat and a ramp spell. And now you're like turn 1 elf, turn 2 that, turn 3 you have 5 mana if you have a land drop. Suddenly you're like really, getting the snowball going. Elves are just very powerful, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they go because they don't slot into everything perfectly. Some versions of mid-range decks don't really want to have Llanowar Elves. It's not really a card that fits their game plan, but it is a card you want to always be thinking about in your green-based decks.
Yeah, and it also just like it's often dictated by the mana, right? Like, one of the things that I think about that this standard format could use is that right now the decks that are going to play the Verges, I think are and on their main color are at a distinct advantage in this format compared to other decks. which is why I think that like, I tried like for example the red black version of like the Leyline red deck, and it
Hmm.
just was like, oh, this is so much worse, like just out of this world worse. And that's important. Like we already have all the fast lines and things like that, and those will rotate out and during this time, and like things will change. But something like Llanowar Elves really cares about your mana, and mana is really important in a format like this current standard. We're in this 3 year standard now, and this, like I said, the speed fluctuates a ton depending on how you build your deck, and you have to account for that speed in your opponents too. I think that we've already seen decks go really hard on spot removal. 4 cutdowns, 4 go for the throats, like really just like I'm not messing around because that's what the format's dictating right now. And I just wonder, you can't. I don't think that you can like play all of a sudden like 1 drop, 3 drop that deck. I think you're still gonna have to fill out your curve, but like have your 3 drops be really impactful if you're gonna play Llanowar Elf.
Yeah, I think like another thing to think about too is like cards like Mosswood Dread Knight do a good job of playing with Llanowar Elf, where it's like you have your 1 into your 3, and then your turn 3, you can either play a powerful 4 or do something like Adventure plus Cast, right? And having ways to fill in your extra mana because you just have more of it is really important for cards like Llanowar Elf. It is basically a land that is destroyable, but in exchange, you get it a lot quicker, right? And so it's a card that has a high power spike early, and you need to capitalize off that power spike, or it's not worth putting in your deck. If you're just playing a deck that doesn't capitalize it, you probably just have cut downs, anoint with afflictions, like interactive spells and bridge. If you're playing that kind of mid range deck, and you're using Llanowar Elves ineffectively, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I do think that like you know what you're saying is true, and also having those 3 drops, it kind of reminds me of like boats in Pioneer for a while there, where it was like, yeah, I mean, sometimes we're gonna draw one too many Llanowar Elves, but like that's
Mm-hmm.
fine because our deck is just full of like the haymakers and the beats. I'm curious your thoughts. We're talking about decks that could use some juice. I know the Gari's one that needs the juice. One of the things that I was thinking about with foundations, both right now, the decks that like don't have it are kind of monocolored decks, and this could be a
Mm-hmm.
philosophy change that I don't understand. But like, I think I've played mono red in this format. I thought it was worse than just splashing. Like I just thought that the mana was too good in splashing not to splash. I played mono black demons in this format, or mono black mid range, and I was like, is this actually better than just playing Golgari mid range as like a mid range deck? You know, I I think like the combos are comparable. Like, what's the reason to do it? I'm kind of curious your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. Like, is there like demons is one that could totally get some juice from foundations. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, my guess is that if I was a game designer trying to create a forever set for beginners that did some tent pulling stuff, I would really promote monocolored decks
Me too.
because monocolored decks are some of the easiest way to get into Magic. It isn't clear to like brand new players that like shock lands are strong, right? Like it doesn't make sense, nor does it make sense to like really want to splash. So having strong monocolored decks, I think, is a really good way in order to like have that like get new players on the rails, and then they don't have to invest money in lands, right? Which is always such like a bad feeling. Like you look at a deck like Gruul Prowess, for example, and look at tabletop, and on Goldfish according to this, it's like a third of the price of the deck, right?
Yeah.
Is just having these verges and fast lands and Curb Pollution Forest, etc. And it's like, well, that sucks. So I do think monocolored stuff's going to get a boost. I don't know in what regard, but I if I was creating a forever set that targets beginners and like tries to be an on-roading, also being like a having a lot of core tools, supporting monocolored decks would be a great way to do that. And then I think one of the interesting things is we're in an era with great mana, like you mentioned, right? Especially that early game mana. Verges are some of the best tools we've had in like the last 10 years. Like surveil lands are very strong because they're fetchable, right? But that is a lot of where their strength is coming from. Verges don't have that same factor, but are just so powerful. Especially like you mentioned, if your deck is a majority of the top color and splashes the bottom color, right? So it's like, oh, I don't need my back end, like my red, for example, until turn 5, 6. So this is basically just a forest for most of the game. That's so powerful. And I think that ends up with a lot of splashing by the nature of the mana. And when we talk about like, the rules of engagement and things like that, that is sort of a thing that happens because of mana like this, I think. And, there might be a design philosophy change, like you mentioned, but I imagine it's something about just like, yep, we're going to have really good fast mana for a little while. And then, those fast lands will leave and we'll have to see how mana looks with Verges without those lands involved.
Well, it's so funny, too, that you mentioned this because, like, Domain, for example, is playing the green-white Verge land, like, as a 4 And it's like, yeah, like, I'm going to be green-white based, and I'm going to splash blue heavily, and then we're going to go from there. And that's how powerful they are. Like, I'm not talking, like, low amounts here. Like, it's like, I think it's a 4 of in every list I've seen for, like 3 weeks now. And
the Verges are insane.
Yeah, they're just, it's like, oh, do I want white mana on my early turns? Cool. Well, this one gives it to me. So I have a couple decks that I want to talk about, but one of the reasons that I want to talk about so many decks, though, is because I don't think the data says there's a lot of decent decks. And I don't know that it says there's any great decks. And I'm kind of curious, like, do you think there's a great, like, standard deck that you just think is, like, overtly the best deck?
I don't know about overtly the best deck. I feel like the Gruul Leyline decks are very efficient, and that puts a ton of pressure. And with not having a lot of people kind of in the coal mines, as it were, that deck is, like, appearing to be at the top and might honestly be there, right? It's so efficient. And honestly looks like a Pioneer deck in a lot of ways at times, which is pretty impressive. I think the Dimir decks are quite good. I think the Golgari decks are fine. We've mentioned the Golgari decks a couple times now in passing. I don't think they're like far and away the best thing, but it's interesting that deck has 2 different win the game combos available in its color pair, right? Between Talent and Vraska, just ultimating and poisoning your opponent out. And then the Unstoppable Slasher plus the Bloodletter Alkazots doing the Demons thing of doing 20 damage on one hit. Very interesting to see that. But personally, I'm kind of in the camp of, like, I think Gruul and Dimir are, like, kind of the best things going on. But there are a lot of decks that I've seen where it's like, I feel like the lists are suboptimal, or the play has just been suboptimal. Like the Simic Tempo deck that is, like, up the Beanstalk plus Tolarian Terror and the Crab is very powerful. I have played against it a lot, and I have just felt like my opponents have made some, like, small tactical errors that if they, like, had taken a second to stop and think about what was going on, they would have very easily won. And when I play the deck myself, I feel it's very strong. So I think there's a lot of room for there to be somewhere on top. I think those are all very good. And then Mike's sort of sleeper pick for the best thing going on that has no real proof is the Azorius Tempo deck. I think that Oculus Mentor package is actually good. I think for a long time it was really bad. Like when people were playing Monastery Mentor versus me, I was so excited. I was like, thank God that card's not playable almost ever. But the Oculus card is so much bigger and so much harder to answer. And I think that's been a huge upgrade for that deck. And I can imagine that deck coming out of Worlds with, like, huge innovations when the pros get their hands on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, some of the sleeper decks, well, I want to talk about Azorius Tempo really quick. I think it's interesting that you didn't mention the Caretaker's Talents decks. Why didn't you?
I think they're just fine decks. Like you like one of my issues with the Caretaker's Talent decks is they are very good. I like some of these, like, decks that feel like they're moving a bit away from being all in on it, but are just using it as an engine. Because Caretaker's Talent is clearly very strong. right? Like if you see that card in play one time, you're like, oh, I kind of get it, right? Like I'm going to attrition you, I'm going to do that thing. But with the raw efficiency of some of the other decks, it's a classic control deck versus hyper efficient decks. And if your answers don't line up correctly, you can sometimes get got, right?
Mhm.
So I don't think the caretaker talent decks are bad. I just think they are kind of the like archetypical control deck. And it's the one that, has good tools and the ability to splash and do other things and can easily probably evolve with the format. But it is not exactly the most appealing thing to me when the format is so wide. When the format were to narrow down, I could easily imagine playing a caretaker's talent controlling deck, or maybe even a more mid-rangey caretaker's talent deck. Like
Sure.
I like the ones with like Urbrass Forge that are like trying to end the game a bit more. Those have been nice. Like they still are playing go long things like Torture Tower and Helix to facilitate that, but they actually have ways to like win the game.
Yeah, you're actually
Which I
going
appreciate.
exactly where I was going to go with this, which I think that like playing mono white in this format is a little weird for this deck.
Mhm.
And I think that when we look at the overall success, whether I think Ginger won with blue this last week, another person I think won with red the week before. Like, I just don't think there's a lot of reason to play a single color. And I'm
Mhm.
with you. I think that like, if you get the chance to play like, Torch of the Tower and Lightning Helix instead of Elspeth's Smite and
Mhm.
whatever else you're doing, I think it's a lot better. Uh,
Yeah.
I also think.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was going to say, I really like that they are moving towards things like Evangelist in the mono white list. Like early on, that was not a thing that was as common, but the Enduring Innocence kind of, I think, adds with that a little bit. And they're just becoming a bit more mid rangey, or the ability to end games, I should say. So, like, I do think the white stuff is moving in a direction that I like, but I feel like the red has kind of been there a bit. It's kind of a realized version of that. If that
we
makes sense.
we were playing the challenge on a Discord call together, me and my friends, and
Mm-hmm.
my his opponent played an Enduring Innocence, and I was like, "Oh, do you have like a kill?" He's like, "No, I'm probably a few turns away from it." I'm like, "Oh, you've already lost this game." Like that card's knuckin' futs. Like that card's so crazy. It's interesting because I think that the Caretaker's talents deck operate on the other side of the format from the
Mm-hmm.
red aggro decks is like the police of the format. You have like these two extremes in a lot of ways of like, no, I'm going to kill you as fast as turn two if I want to build my deck that way. Or like I'm going to make it so like, I played a lot of the turtle ramp deck that I have in our Discord it's just my favorite deck to play by like a lot. And that deck draws and sees most of its deck most games.
Mm-hmm.
And I get out attrition by this mono white deck like no other. I remember a time I was on a call with my friend Matt Kling, and they played a Caretaker's Talent, and it was pretty early on before the new set came out. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I think I have to kill this. He's like, why? This doesn't seem very good. And by the end of the game, he was like, is that Fabled Passage or Fabled the Mirrorbreaker? What just happened? I was like, I told you we had to kill it.
Yeah, I think it's stronger. Well, in long games, it's stronger than Fable by
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think of my police comment though? Is that
Well, we're saying the same thing, right? Like, I think it's like the controlling end of things. Like, it's on the other. Like, we're saying the same words in
oh, I
different
see.
ways. I
You just
feel.
don't like you don't feel that side of the format is strong.
Yeah, I think we're in a very open field. So traditionally, I don't like control as much, despite playing the worst blue black control deck you've ever seen at 4 miles per hour. you know?
Seen some pretty bad ones.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. Like, I think that we have a clear most consistent deck in the
Mhm.
rule deck, and I'm actually not talking about the leyline version. I'm actually talking about the like rule slick shot, top eight's a challenge every weekend,
Mhm.
wins, a challenge every other weekend.
Mhm.
Is it weird to you that that happens despite the fact that people are putting so many cheap removal spells in their deck?
No, removal spells don't beat efficient threats. We've known that for a while now, right? And things like Caretaker's Talent do a good job of invalidating these removal spells. Like when I was early on in testing for Pioneer, that was a thing I tried. Sorry, not Caretaker's Talent. Pardon me, misspoke. Innkeeper's Talent. That is one where like I was testing it really early on for the RC because of how efficient it was, even versus 1 mana interaction. So my opponent having 2 mana interaction now becomes 3. It's so easy to overwhelm them. So I'm not surprised at all that like this knockoff Pioneer deck just is strong and standard, right? Like it demands that you have the right answers and that you have a lot of them. The deck doesn't play like, 15 creatures. It plays like 20, 22 creatures, and some of them replace themselves. So it's a very impressive deck, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's, if I ever am like, if I'm ever dirtling around and like trying to try stuff and I end up losing, it's definitely the one that I queue into in a league to be like, all right, it's time to recoup some money. Like, let's go do this. Is there any other decks you want to discuss?
No, I think I mentioned most of mine. Like, I'm really interested to talk about standard after we see what happens with World, because I feel like we're in such a weird time. I mean, I'll say this. I'll talk about my awesome blue-black control deck that's like just a bunch of Jason and Deadly Cover-Ups and Horn Lockwell. Yeah.
I don't remember who was asking me. They were like, Spencer, do you think there's anything missing in standard that could like exist? And I was like, yeah, I think that we're too married to Demoralize. Like, I actually think that blue-black actually totally has the juice to like compete. And like, I have this crazy blue-black deck on my arena account that like, I have not updated it since the new set came out because I've been trying all the new cards, but like I had a very high win percentage with it against like the Caretaker's Talent stuff, the like, you get really efficient removal spells like that you don't have to sacrifice for, you get efficient interaction. Like I'm a little surprised that people aren't like, how many Jaces do you have in your deck, first of all?
4, obviously. It's my only win condition.
I knew you were. I don't have that many, but I didn't know you were going to say. But
I think, no, Jason's the best card. Jason's the reason to play the deck. It's like Jason Deadly Cover-Up.
Yeah, Deadly Cover-Up. Totally agree. Yeah, you can pop off about this deck for a second. I think that like classic blue-black control is underexplored, and it is only because No More Lies exists.
Yeah, no, my big thing about blue-black control is like everyone is trying to play all the kill spells, like Spencer said. And so I dodge all of that. My deck has like, I think 2 or 3 Lockhorn Whales, depending on the day, in it that are like, sense. Yeah, like I do need some way to like theoretically pressure people. And it's just like a pretty good kill spell, actually. Like you combine that, like your opponent attacks their Slick Shot, you Lockhorn Whale it, you play Jace, you mill them. It's like a way to like actually turn it into a kill spell. And Jace is just actually like a really strong Planeswalker. It does a good job of blanking your opponent's pressure while also winning the game, and recoups a lot of cards. And all you're really trying to do is just play a ton of answer spells to pick apart what your opponent's doing. And then, eventually you just like Jace mill them for 15, the game's over because you like played the game.
I also think that your creature land specifically, it like helps your game plan a lot more than blue-white. You end up having to play like Caretaker's Talent and blue-white control and like I don't know, like what do you really lose other than No More Lies, right? Like I think that like 3 steps ahead goes in both decks, right? So like,
yeah, I don't even want that much counter magic is the thing.
Yeah,
like that's part of the big reason I don't even mind being Dimir versus Azorius is like, while No More Lines is a cheap, efficient answer, the format is very efficient on threats.
Yes,
and having my counter spells around my hand is a very easy way to lose. So like my deck has like a mixture of like I have a couple cut downs, some Shieldrick Edicts because I need to be able to answer opposing Planeswalkers, Anointed Affliction, and go for the throats. And then I have a couple change the equation, I believe 2, and then 4 3 steps ahead, and that's all my counters. Yeah. Like I'm just killing stuff and playing a lot of card draw in the kind of a Nassif way.
Sure.
And just really making the game go long and very easily like Deadly Cover-Up, take the big card from your deck and move on. I'm even playing things like, I think it's called Withering Torment. It kills a creature or an enchantment. Like I have some of those on my sideboard. And when you do stuff like that, all you need to do, is kill the first caretaker's talent. And then I've, deadly covered up on the empty board after doing that before, and then just got rid of the talent. And I'm like, okay, the game's over. Like, Jace draws more cards than anything.
Yeah.
It's so easy to, like, mill someone for, like, 9, and then minus your Jace to kill it to draw 3 cards, and then you're pretty happy with that. Like, that is enough to typically win most games. And you're right, the creature land does work very well in blue-black. It's funny because I have so few creatures in game 1. I feel like they're just sitting there and I never use them. And then game 2 and 3, they're always like killing them because they sign without
board or something.
No, I have a couple Chrome Host Seed Sharks, and I have a couple. I forget, Urtai, the Resurrected. I had a Tidebinder, but then I switched to Urtai just because I wanted to be able to kill Resolved Planeswalkers because Liliana was such a problem. Obviously, Tidebinder answers that to some extent. But it's really just like game 1, like you're mentioning, so many people have kill spells for creatures. A big advantage I have is those like 8 to 10 cards don't affect me.
Yeah.
And then if I animate my creature land, though, it does. So it's like very like sometimes my opponent will like tap out and I'll be like, okay, I could kill your thing, but I'm going to get in my mill 4 right now. I'm just going to like get in while the getting's good.
No,
it's like surprisingly good.
I've had a lot of similar experiences with like the Turtle Ramp deck that I've talked about. Like, it's like nice cut down, like nice. I mean, even nice go for the throat, like whatever. Like I've already this has already done its damage. Like, you're welcome to go for the throat this.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to need 6 more of those, buddy. Like,
yeah. Yeah, I had an opponent the other day where I actually animated, and I was like, all right, like, you better kill this, because I actually don't even care if it hits you. I just care about getting those 4 cards in your graveyard, Like, I just need to, like, you're going to have to work through all these. It doesn't matter, It's a weird format we're in. And it just feels underexplored.
That's exactly how I feel. Looking at the data, 10 decks, I think we said above, they have 50 or above in the last 60 days for data that we know. That just screams like Worlds is going to be really interesting to watch. Like,
yeah, I'm very excited to see it. The Azorius Tempo deck is the one that I have my eye on. It's just like I could see them cleaning that up very well. And same with the Simic Tempo deck. Like, it looks like a budget, like Saffron Olive deck, but I don't know if you've actually picked up and played it, Spencer. It's like pretty strong, especially if you clean up some of the cards and like go less all in on the thing. But cards like this town ain't big enough is like really strong with like your kind of hard to answer threats and you're up the beanstalk and just sort of undoes some of the problem that these like heavy bounce spell decks do. And like Storm Chaser's Talent is like a really strong card. And that's like a great one that like, to bounce and pick up and reuse. So I'm really curious to see how this deck does.
I think there's a teamer version of that deck too that I wanted to try. A deck, just 2 decks that we didn't mention, and then I think we can just move on. Somebody messaged me that they were crushing it with the Gruul Delirium deck, and I looked at the first list that came out from, I think it took either like 2nd or 3rd in a challenge, and I was like, I'm not playing this. Like, there's no chance. But I think that people have been working really hard on that deck since. Really put in the work to make it a lot more interesting. And then the last one is one that I lose to. It's got the cheese mason. It's got the Parmesan, as the Masons say. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
It's Azorius Enchantments. Oh my gosh, that deck can be so annoying at times. You're like, oh, okay. And it's funny because like you can have great answers in your deck for like, yeah, this will just blow them out. They're going to lose instantly when I play it. You don't draw it, and then you're just like dead in 2 turns. You're like, well, I did not draw my card for this matchup, so I'm dead.
Yeah.
It's like a lot.
Yeah. There's a lot of things, and I want to highlight that like every deck we've talked about today is like headlining a bunch of Duskmourn cards or got like a huge upgrade from Duskmourn.
Oh yeah.
Duskmourn is like a very good set, and with the organized play announcement, we're gonna have a lot of standard later this year. Might be a good time to pick up some Duskmourn cards before prices go up.
Pick up some boxes. Pick up some singles. We don't have a sponsor for singles. If you want to sponsor the podcast, so that we can send people your way for singles, let us know. Okay, that's going to do it for standard. Unless you have any other thoughts, I think we recovered it pretty good. Should we talk about those OP updates really quick?
Sure, let's
What
do it.
what happened, Mason?
Basically, they announced the next year of Magic Organized Play. We know where 3 of the 4 Magic Cons are going to be. And we know that the first, maybe it's the whole year, I'm not exactly sure, but Q1, Q2, and Q3 of Magic is going to be modern again and the standard into standard. So a lot of people have been asking what RCQ season is next. And a lot of people assumed it was going to be standard because that's kind of how it had been laid out before, right? It was standard, pioneer, modern, and sort of a cyclical nature. It looks like it's going to be modern again next season. So I'm really hopeful for it being our announcement in December, like they had talked about before, especially if we're going to just run it right back. And the real question that I have that I don't think was answered is, do they use, I mean, the implication of Q1, 2, and 3 applies to 4, right? Like you don't have a third of a quarter, but we might see Pioneer in the back half. I don't know. We know 3/4 of the year what the formats are going to be and what the Magic Cons are. And, Pioneer is taking a back seat at least until the end of the year. And standard is going to have 6 months in a row. We're going to go RCQ standard into RCQ standard season. And you can just expect a lot of that. And maybe that's just the way things are going to be, Spencer. Maybe we're going to have like RCQ, and maybe that's why it's modern. Maybe it'll be Pioneer. We don't know really the plan. And I'm curious to see kind of how it evolves, but that's what we know so far.
Yeah, I do think that 6 months of a format is kind of cool. Like, I when I read it, I was like, modern again. I've been buying all these standard cards. And then, yeah, like, I don't know, like, I did buy modern cards for modern season. I haven't played any modern events yet, but I'm excited to see what happens with modern, because they also have said that they will, as you mentioned, be doing bands with the seasons now. So we'll see what happens here. I have no problems with this. Like, it felt like people were saying that like Pioneer was dead today on Twitter, and I didn't feel that way. I was like, I think that like at worst they're just gonna go like the worst thing possible, in my opinion, for like Pioneer lovers is that it was going to be modern, standard, Pioneer, standard, modern, standard, Pioneer. And like, I just don't think that will work up with their sales cycles either. I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens. I think that we don't have enough information, and people love overreacting.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the object permanence of a goldfish, then like you don't see Pioneer on the screen, and you're like, my format's dead. And I say that jokingly. I understand that Pioneer is someone's favorite format, right? And if like maybe Modern had been there, maybe I would be acting differently. I'm not sure. I would guess I wouldn't, but maybe I would. Who knows, right? And when you feel like that's happening, it can be very frustrating. I think if, for example, Spencer, let's pretend they locked in the next 2 years of formats, right? And it goes format, right? So it's modern now, standard, then it's Pio, then it's, modern, then standard, then Pio, right? Would players be feeling that same way, knowing that the Pioneer is coming 9 months later, right? Like, we just don't know what it's going to be. And they're letting us know, like, hey, it's okay to invest in standard. You're going to get more use out of it. And we're not having this awkwardness. So, yes, it sucks if Pioneer is your favorite or the only format you play. You're not going to have RCQ support for 9 months. But also, you might have 6 months of RCQ support, right?
Actually,
and
do you have like a Gruul Slickshot deck in Pioneer? You can just like play standard. Like that, you can just do that.
Yeah, and like, like I think honestly the biggest critique of Pioneer I have is that it is, standard plus Thoughtseize in a lot of ways. And obviously that's oversimplification, right? Like there's Grease Fang and there's, the deck I played at the RC Enigmatic can't exist in standard. But like, we're going to see Pioneer again, probably. And, if the demand's really there, we'll see secondary circuits like SCG, like NRG. They're going to do it. We talk about like there's not going to be any high level Pioneers, what some people have been saying. And it's like, well, we don't know what the GPs are going to be, right? We now have these GPs that we're going to have, I think they said 9 of the first year. And we know two of them are going to be standard and modern. Or sorry, one of each are going to be standard and modern. So that's two of the 9. But if like let's say two of the total are Pioneer, that's a couple events, right? We don't know the back half of the year. So I understand frustration. I understand disappointment. But someone's always going to be sort of left carrying, the sack, as it were. You can always be a popper player. So, they never get anything.
I just want to say that, like, two Pioneer players, that SEG came back to Vegas for the first time since the pandemic this year. And they had CEDH as their main event. And the two Pioneer events actually outperformed the main event for this. So, like, if SEG comes back west, they're definitely not doing CEDH again, and they will support, Pioneer, Modern, probably those two. So I don't doubt that Pioneer will get support. So if you want to check out something close to Pioneer, you can do that in Explorer and use untapped.gg. They're like 10 cards off, I think, was the last update, from 100% of the decks that were registered for the RC.
What? The 10 cards off for untapped.gg?
No, sorry. For Explorer to Pioneer.
Sure.
You got there. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. None of them were in the last Explorer anthologies, for what it's worth.
Oh, sure.
Because none of the Explorer anthologies cards I'll play. But, we're getting there. We're getting there. Slowly but surely. But Untapped.gg as a sponsor, use the affiliate code. You too can test Pioneer, as well as Standard, as there's so much Standard coming up. It's a great way, whether it's the premium or the free, just using our link to sign up does help us, and we really appreciate it. Shout out to everybody who's checked out the swag store. You can do that on YouTube or in the link in the show notes.
I want to correct myself real quick here, because I mentioned Q1, Q2, Q3. They actually, for some reason, on there say Q2, Q3, Q4, which does imply until the end of the year. So I guess we're in Q1 right now. So they're using like the
fiscal year for what it's worth.
Yeah, I guess
so if their fiscal year starts earlier, then they're just doing it by their fiscal year.
Okay, well, I just want to apologize because I had said Q1, Q2, Q3 because I thought it was going on like the New Year cycle. So there won't be any more Pioneer this year. Because I was, in the RCQ formats, right? Assuming this does go to the end of the year. But I guess it could be their Q1 of next year, which would be our year.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So if they're doing it by fiscal year, there would still be another quarter.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to apologize for that because I did misquote the thing. I think it's important, when judging them.
Always improving, buddy. Always improving. Speaking of which, let's talk about it. Mason, what have you done to be always improving? It's the point of this podcast. We want to always be trying to get better. You just did it on the podcast live. I love it. What have you been working on there, buddy?
Well, I'm going to throw Spencer to the bus and say, his always improving is his show notes. He threw them off. I'm supposed to go second. No, I'm just kidding. Mine is enjoying the ride because one day I'm going to quit constructorism. I'm going to quit playing competitive Magic. I am going to, stop engaging in the level I do now. I don't think I'll ever stop playing Magic. And I think, I'll probably always, play like some local event or cube or play arena or MTGO to some level, but it will take a back seat. And I just think it's important to really enjoy the moment we have now and really not get caught up in like, oh, this or that's going on. Like it's the death of Pioneer or something. You know what I mean? Like not trying to let like little things bother me and just really enjoy it for what it is. Because one day it's going to be over, And what really sparked this was I was talking to someone locally and they were talking about like how my RC go. I mentioned how I accidentally dropped while still alive for the Pro Tour. And they were like, trying to console me or whatever. And I was like, oh no, it's like good. It happens or whatever, right? Like it's not the end of the world. And they mentioned like, maybe it's different because you've already played some Pro Tours, right? But if it was me, I'd be like really, frustrated, right? At minimum. And I was like, no, I think that's totally fair. And it just kind of made me think like, like I need to be having this approach even more, right? Like we talked about it before the RC, like in our private DMs, like my goal for the RC was I wanted to play fun games of Magic. I wanted to have good games. That's all I really wanted. Because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, right? I don't really care if I play the Pro Tour again. Like, it'd be nice. I want to play another Pro Tour. That fire matters, but I want to enjoy my time with Magic because it is rapidly coming to an end. You know, like, I'm getting older. Things are going to change. And I imagine there's another, year or two minimum left of me going full steam. But at some point, it's going to have to slow down, right? And I just want to enjoy this time that I do have because it does end. It always ends for everything, right? And I don't know. I think that's important. I want to talk about it. So,
I mean, if you've listened to this podcast for the last 10 years, you know that it changed for me. Like, I had kids. I went to a Pro Tour. I had a kid. We got pregnant before the next Pro Tour. And, like, my life changed. And, like, I think that one of the beautiful things about your always improving moment is, like, recognizing it in the moment. There's a song by Kesha, and oh my gosh, who's the other one by? Who's the other artist? It's actually not by Kesha. Kesha's features on the song. Anyway, it's called "The Good Old Days," and it basically says, like, I wish somebody would have told me that where I just was the good old days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about those times where, like, I went from, like, this player mode of, like, trying to go to the Pro Tour and, like, that was my goal, right? Like, that's all I wanted in the whole world. Mm-hmm. To switching to, like, being the team captain and, like, helping others at the Pro Tour. And that, like, 3-year span, like, was crazy. Like, it was so fun. We had 2 silver pros, a bronze pro, a gold pro. Like, we really did amazing stuff. But, like, I thought it was going to last forever. Like, I couldn't imagine a world in which any of us stopped and all of us moved on. Like, it happens. Mm-hmm. So I really love this always improving moment because it's so real. Like, it's just, I mean, coaching Magic for, I don't know how many hours you do today. I think it's close to 7 or 8.
Yeah, we're putting 40 hours a week. Yeah.
So, and what's crazy is, like, you probably have some 12s in there, and, like,
when the RC comes around, it gets a little.
It's just like I've done that in my job, and it's when you get those 12s, you're like, it's satisfying, but it's like, holy crap, I don't know how I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you should be proud of, like, recognizing it right now.
Thank you. Yeah. It's going to end, and, like, the last always improving segment for me will come. I am closer to it than I was my first, I think, is a good way to think about things. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's just important to know. And I don't know, like, people always worry about an ending or stuff like that. And maybe I'll feel differently when the time comes, right? But, like, very similar to TV shows, I think the ending isn't all that matters, right? Like, if you enjoyed the rest of it, it's fine. Like, I don't like the ending to a lot of things that I really love, but I enjoyed everything else about it, and that doesn't ruin the experience to me.
So I agree. How I Met Your Mother is great. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, My Hero Academia is great. Yeah.
Oh, don't do that to me. Why would you do that to me live on recording? Why would you do that to me? Don't say that.
Because I'm a deeply dark twisted person.
Why would you do this to me? I am so upset right now. Live on recording. Okay. Oh man, why did you do that?
This wasn't for me. He's having a moment.
Dude, okay. I hope that was a joke.
That's one secret I'll never tell. XOXO, Gossip Girl. Dude, another show where the ending's really bad, but the ride's worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, Jujutsu Kaisen, terrible ending. Spoilers for those in the future.
Okay.
It's great. You should watch Jujutsu Kaisen. It's awesome. Blue Lock's Animation Season 2, you should still watch Season 1. It's fine.
Oh, my chest is literally tightening. Why did you do that?
I didn't think I'd give you a chest tightening moment. I thought we'd have a little ha-ha and move on.
No.
Maybe a little hee-hee.
I Okay. So my always improving moment was taking a break. I really, really needed one. And I just want to give an anti shout out. Like, if you want to leave a comment that says, like, I can't believe Spencer talks about his mental health on the show, just don't leave it. Like, I don't care. I've been starting really bad with depression for like a couple weeks. And a huge part of that is just like fulfillment in different areas of my life. And, you know, one of the things that I try not to do, because I think it's really bad, is to have magic fill a void. Because I don't think that's healthy for my relationship with magic. And I was starting to do that, and I noticed it as I noticed getting really upset about variants. And I was like, oh, wait a second. Hold on. I picked a deck with 20 lands, and I'm getting mad about drawing lands. And to be fair, like, my variants were bad. Like, there's no denying, like, how bad they were. But if I'm letting it affect me emotionally and physically and, like, mentally, it is worth it to take a step back. And since then, I played a ton of Magic the last 2 days. But I think that it's important to just be okay with saying, like, I'm going to put this thing down that I am clearly too emotionally attached to at this moment, because I'm not always in control of the outcome. And that's okay. Like, if I'm not okay with being in control of my outcomes at this moment, this isn't the thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's really good. It's just important to understand when you take a step back.
That is going to do it for Always Improving. I just want to give a shout out to Abe. I missed him this week. And I didn't do that at the beginning of the show because I forgot. And I missed his Always Improving moment because that was great. I want to give 2 shout outs this week to our patrons. First one is our newest patron, Cole. Cole, shout out. Thank you so much for joining. Cole joined that platinum supporter level, that level that gets you access to stuff. If you join that level, don't forget to check your welcome message. You make sure that you can join the Discord, things like that. If you're like, oh man, where do I get my benefits? Check your welcome message. It probably helps. And then a special shout out to Historis, because apparently I missed it last week. And I missed it another week that I was gone. And all I want to say is, we appreciate you in the Discord. You're special to us, and you matter. So thank you. Our Patreon question this week comes from Dexagos. Big Dex, let's go! What is your jam in Standard? Do you agree with Reduke's recent assessment that on Channel 5 that Gruul Leyline is the best Standard deck? I am so glad this is our Patreon question, and I'm going first. I do not agree. I think that this deck is a lot higher variance than people are willing to admit. Even with a really good sideboard plan, I think that it is it amplifies the resource heaviness of other prowess style Gruul decks that we've seen in the last 2 years now, to the maximum level that you maybe could do it and still have a playable deck. And I think it has some of the best cards of those decks. In fact, I would say it probably does have the best cards of those decks. I think that it is not just like, I think the deck is good. I think that you have to be okay with the fact that, like, you probably can't win a lot of games on a Mole to 5, which is true with most decks, but I think this one is like very specific. And then, like, so that means that your Mole to 6 are like really important, and that you have to be very disciplined. My jam in Standard right now is decks that can play early interaction, that have a late game that lets you be proactive still. So many decks will continue to make plays into the late game that need to be answered, that are set up to beat decks like this, because this was the hotness for 2 weeks. Last week I talked about playing the challenge with it. Even though myself and Quentin didn't do well with it, it still did well. Like, it was still probably the best performing deck of the weekend. This weekend, that was not true. People were like, we're not losing to this. It's not happening. And they were able to beat it. I think that it will be a rotation of things in standard, as we've talked about a little bit on the show, of that adjustment of speed. Like, you have to find the speed that's right for the given week. And I think that the Leyline deck will be a lot like Affinity, where it's like, oh, there are weeks where people are not prepared and it's just going to completely dominate. And there will be weeks where it's like, this was wrong. I should not have done this.
I'd like to ask you a clarifying question for an earlier statement. When you were talking, you mentioned this deck is very high variance.
Yes.
Does that high variance to you mean a decrease in power? And
no.
Okay.
Are those correlated?
That's what I was going to say. I don't think they are correlated.
Oh, no,
but
I don't.
The way you were
don't
talking made me think that you thought they maybe were.
It's not the most powerful deck in standard. It's just in the best deck in standard.
Sure. I guess. Yeah, I guess we're having a little bit of a sure. Okay. I guess so. You would say the variance is so bad with the deck that it's not.
I don't even know that it's that. Like, here's the thing. When I started with the deck, I was 18-1, and I literally texted my friends. I was like, "Hey, Quentin was going to play the Gruul Slickshot deck, and I was like, hey, I think that's so unreasonable. Here's the reasons I think it's why it's reasonable. I'm going to play this deck because I don't think that people will possibly understand just how fast and powerful this deck really is." And they did not. And even though we did bad, the deck did not. Mm-hmm. I was like, there's no, like, people will just add 2 extra moves. Like, they'll add, like, temporary lockdown to their sideboard and I'll be like, that's cool. Good job. Like, that did not, like, I have haste creatures that kill you after you do that. Like, it is that powerful. The thing is like, you know, if you have a weekends like Quinn and I did, and, you know, you're always going to have these in Magic, and I'm saying that this deck is susceptible to it, is that if you draw your 5th land, and we were drawing our 7th lands and still being in game, so that's how powerful the deck is. It's pretty rough. Like, it doesn't have comeback cards like Questing Druid or you know, even its discard spell. I mean, I had a game yesterday. It was really funny. I'll just tell this anecdote because I think it's hysterical. Where I had a Leyline in play, and I cast the discard curse spell. Or not curse. Roll spell that targets, and then you discard 1, draw 2. I drew 4 lands and was like, well, this is crazy. And it's just something that happens sometimes with this deck. I think more so than any other deck I've played. And you can do things to try to mitigate it, but I think the things that try to mitigate it take you back to something more like Gruul Slickshot than they do something like this. So you have to either accept the variants that are happening to you, which obviously works, like, you know, as long as any time that people aren't prepared for it, it's gonna just run them over. I had a game in that Discord where somebody cast 3 cut downs in the first 3 turns against me. Right? And it's something that happens. But I think that because of the way that we built our decks, we're asking people a question that we don't have counterplay to. Like, there's nothing we can do if they decide to build their decks in the way to beat it. So
you not play cards like Snakeskin Veil as some of your opponents play.
We played extra Snakeskin Veils.
Yeah. The way you're describing it, I mean, I mentioned earlier in the show, I think it is one of the better decks. I don't think I know enough to answer what is the strongest, but to me it is like the deck that if I'm building a deck, I need to have an answer, like a coherent plan for it.
Yeah.
So that, to me, makes it feel like it is at worst one of the best decks. And when I play against it, it is very strong. And I often feel like if I wasn't playing cards like Anoint or like Shieldrick's Edict, I would just be dead.
Yes.
I actually think like Cut Down's pretty bad against them.
No, I think Anoint is actually like the perfect example of like when people made that shift and they're like, no, we're going to just start playing exile effects. Like we're not dealing with this crap. It was a huge hit to the deck, but they didn't do that in the masses until I would say like the last like week and a half.
Sure. So you think it's not the most powerful because of this?
It's probably the most powerful deck, right? Like it just wins on turn 2 if left unchecked, right? Like there's I don't know that we've ever had a standard deck that could do that.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, to me, it just seems like it's very mana efficient and lines up incredibly well, unless your opponent's literally hard target you, which I think creates some weird, interesting like power vacuum spots for things like I don't know if you've seen like the 4-color like Beanstalk Doppelgang decks,
Yeah,
or like Caretaker's Talent.
I've actually lost the Doppelgang deck once, so that's funny.
Yeah, and so I think it's like a very interesting position. I don't know the answer to the question. I know that if I know this. I'm playing a team tournament that has standard, and I'm the standard seat in 3 weeks. Well, actually, I guess it's 4 weeks. It's the week Foundations is released, so I can play with that set. But my current thought process is if I'm going to be playing a non-leyline deck, it needs to be a deck that is hard, like very much able to stop that, or is playing Llanowar Elves, so I can be like at least fast enough to get on the board and like hopefully interrupt what's going on. So
I love that.
I don't know the answer.
I actually think Glissa is quite good against that deck for what it's worth. So
yeah, I had Glissa at the RC, and it was good against them. I imagine it's great in standard.
that is going to do it. Thank you so much for the Patreon question, Big Dax, and you can join the conversation where we give people nicknames because we can't read, just like Big Dax. Just become a patron of $5 or more. There's a public Discord. The things going on there. I think Adrian really tries to use that public Discord for like limited. So if you like limited stuff like that, that's in the show notes. And then I just want to give a huge shout out to the YouTube comments. I did not expect an outpouring of support for me being sick one week, but the YouTube comments like Spencer, help you get better, and that was like the light of my week last week. So I just want to say thank you. That meant a lot. So, and then you can follow us on Twitter at CCMTG. Like, comment, subscribe, review, whatever you need to do. It really does help the show. Like we've seen it as we've asked for it at the end of every week. We've challenged you guys to different things. When you do those things, the show grows. Thank you. Mason, where can people find you?
Find me over on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark, and you can reach out to me for coaching using that same Twitter account or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. Put coaching in the description. That way I know why the sentence has been so about you.
You can find me at Keezy Game on Twitter, Spencer13H on Threads, every week on the wonderful Need to Nerd podcast, where we talk about stuff. We're talking about rom-coms. What's your favorite rom-com, Mason?
I don't have one.
Oh, man, I love rom-coms. I'm a huge rom-com guy. And then started up Constructed Clash here on the YouTube channel. Check it out. And then you can find Abe at More Nothings on Twitter. And that is going to do it for this week. We'll see y'all next week with a brand new episode of Constructed Criticism.